Because we don't deal with what? Yes. Now when we get to epistemology, we'll find out why. Now let's go over here. They want as many pelts as they can get. So they killed off a lot of what? If you want timber from the forest, you don't want one log dragged through the forest. You have to cut down a whole side of things, float them down the stream to get to the mill, and you kill off the fish. Now you see what they've successfully done? They've destroyed the ecological what? In order to have the what? Yes. Now, can these people keep their axiology in place? Now we're going to put them on a reservation. There's no way you can maintain an ecological balance on that little tiny reservation. So what they end up doing is drugs, drinking, fighting, killing each other off. Finally, they woke up and they said, all right, there's a treaty between the United States and the sovereign Indian nation. Are we a sovereign nation? The government said, yes, of course you are. He said, well, we're going to open what on our reservations? That's it. Now it's time to do what to the rules? Yes, because they charge an income tax for the American federal government on the money they make on the reservation. All right? Okay. Now let's look to see what happens to our children in school. Go to the next column, epistemology. Epistemology addresses how do you know knowledge? How do you know something? That's what we're talking about. How do we know things? Europeans reduce knowledge to its lowest common denominator. Let me explain that. If you were a young Greek centuries ago, you, like your father and your grandfather, when you were of age, you would be sent to study in Africa at Memphis or Luxor. That's where they were educated. They would leave as a young adult. A young adult was 15. Jews are adults at what age? 13, bar mitzvah. Already you have a child, so your seed has been carried on. Now you're released to go study. They had to study the rhetoric and those things for about 12 years, 4 years engineering and 4 years of math. That's about 20 years of study. So 15 plus 20 equals 35 years of age. When they went home, they found that the life expectancy for the rest of the Greeks was what? 27. That's not a very cost-beneficial educational program, is it? So you have to reduce what has to be learned if everyone is to learn it, because it took too long. All these people will be what? So you've got to reduce it. Now how do you reduce it? You reduce it to its lowest common denominator. In the African learning process, we always dealt with the spirit, with the mind, and with the body, which is the intellectual, the intellect, and the physical. Now they said, we will reduce learning to its lowest common denominator. We will say that you can know if you can count and what? Measure. See it on your paper? So knowing has been reduced to what? Counting and measuring. The what? The object. That's called scientific what? Method. You see what they've done? They've elevated that which was already lowered to something greater than what it is. Let's go through that again, because you didn't get it. Counting, they took valid African ways of knowing and reduced it to its lowest common denominator, which is you have to what to know? And measure the what? And they elevated it in their language to scientific method. So if you don't count it and if you can't count it and measure it, they said it's not knowable. You see what I'm saying? You see what I'm saying? All right, now let's go through that and see what happens here. They said to count and measure. Fine. You can count and measure physical things. You can count and measure intellectual things. Idiot, imbecile, moron, IQ. Can you count and measure spirit? Then scrap it. Now you have a dilemma. The knowledge is stored in the what? But in a very short time, the body what? Dies. So the Greek dilemma is to separate the what from the what? Yes, that's called the mind-body split. Now what comes out of that we still live with today? That's true. What happens is people ascribe values. So they ascribe that people who work with their head are good and lead us to God. Those people who work with their physical things then become bad. So you have white-collar workers and what? Who gets paid more money? Yes, because they are what? Using their what? With the exception of plumbers. Now, here's what's very important in this. If a person says, I want to be your leader and I will lead you to God and goodliness, then they are required to give up the what? Yes. What religion has that practice today? Catholics, Catholicism. Celibacy of the priesthood. You see how that goes? Now let's look at some of the other things that happen on the jobs today. If physical things are bad, sex is a physical act. Therefore, sex is, by this way of thinking, what? Bad. Unless it has been elevated to procreation. Now, do you see how some groups of people think the only reason you to have sex is to have what? Babies. You see? And they practice laws and things like that that say that's the only way you have sex. Do you see what I'm talking about? That's where all these crazy things come from that have nothing to do with us as black people. Okay, now let's go and look at this again. If sex is a physical act, what kind of an act do you have to perform to show sexual intent? Let's go through this again. Sex is a physical act. If I have sexual intent, I must perform what kind of an act to let you know that I have a sexual intent? Physical. Now let's take that into an office. Harassment. What happened? What happened? He what? He touched me. Do you see the idea of touch being the physical, expressing sexuality? Now you see, in black culture, we hug each other all the time, and it has no what? No sexual content to it. All these women that grab me and hug me out here would be offended if they thought I thought they were trying to get over with me. You see what I'm talking about? Because it's what? An expression of what? Love and establishing the what with us as black people? Relationship. You see what I'm talking about? Now, if you don't think that it has sexual content, look at two white men and ask them to hold hands. I do these lectures where it's all white. It was like 15 white men in Nichols. I asked two of them to come up here and I said, well, hold each other's hand. They turn purple. Because in their culture, touch is linked to sex. Touch and sex are linked. And in Catholicism, you have an admonishment against touch. No me tangere. Don't touch me. Because they're constantly linking touch to what? Which in their perception is physical and therefore what? Bad. But that's not us. Okay? confusing things here. Now that you know the origin, if the highest value is in the object, you count and measure. How do they know? They assemble parts. There's that word that becomes the what? The whole. They do it in a linear way, and they do it sequential. A follows B, follows C, follows D, follows E, follows F. Now, take parts to the whole, linear sequential, put it into a factory. Tell me what that's called. Assembly line. That's how Europeans got rich. Henry Ford made us a billion-dollar nation by having the process by which we make automobiles, linear sequential, parts to the whole, count and measure. All right? Now let's see what our situation is. Ours is symbolic imagery and rhythm, and we perceive the whole. Now on your paper, after the word rhythm, somebody's going to ask you, do they mean clapping your hands? That's not that. Rhythm means function. Put down function. If your heart is out of rhythm, it is not what properly? Not functioning properly. You see what I'm saying? Now what are symbolic images? Parables, proverbs. You see? These are the things we use all the time. Okay? Man, that's bad. Okay, that's symbolic imagery for what? Good. That ain't too cool. What are some other symbolic images? All right? Don't act ugly. Now, how can you act ugly? But that's a symbolic what? It's not a grammatical error. It's a symbolic image. Pretty is as pretty what? There you are. See, this is the way we know. This is our epistemology. It's very important that we understand this because our children come into dealing, they come from homes where the highest value is in the relationship. They go into public schools and they carry this holistic way of knowing. Give me the big what? Yes. But they're given a what to learn and told to do what to it. Then you're given another what? That you what? Then another what? Now on Friday you're given a test on the what? And our kids don't do too well. How many of you are of West Indian descent? You will have brothers and sisters who grew up in the West Indies. And then the youngest children were born and raised here. The ones born and raised, boy children, in the West Indies read and write and spell. The ones born here, for some reason, are dyslexic. Need special ed, some kind of problem. Same gene pool, what happened? Two different epistemologies for teaching. Two different methods for teaching the same ideas. Teachers in the islands maintain the what with the pupil? And the what? The relationship. Children are treated here as the what? Yes. They're never told the what? They're only talked to about the what? Yes. Are you beginning to see now where we have problems? Because the place they start our children to learning is contradictory. It's confusing. If you have always looked to ask, what is the big what? And somebody starts talking about this little point over here. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Look at these markers. Well, people will say, looking at the part, this is the red marker because it has a red cap. This is the blue, this is the green. But for our culture, we say this is the black cap, the white bottom, the felt tip, the black ink? What is the chemical composition of the ink? Because we're thinking about the what? Not a what. And that's the difference. Many of you go to college. You get your first assignments. They have given you 1,000 what? And they test you on the what? And you're always confused because you know you had a whole lot apart.